this is Treblinka, and now I'm going to take you on the route, or show you the route of the people who were brought here to be murdered. Now, the monument was built in 1964. Somehow, in a way, it sort of even obscures the vision of the camp and its size. Doesn't quite make it into the same places as things were in 1942 as it's shown in this 1964 monument. But thanks to archaeological work, we can now say a number of things. Right, railway line coming in with these sleepers. Obviously these are far bigger than normal sleepers are, and somewhere around here was the entrance to the camp. So the wagons were kept at Treblinka station, 4.5 kilometers from here, and then they were pushed in. And initially what would happen was that they were pushed so that the driver of the train wouldn't see what would happen, but later it's clear from the evidence that the drivers also went into the camp, the Polish drivers. So you see Shoah, there are two drivers which are interviewed in that, and if you have a look at the United States Holocaust Museum, the website, they've got the interviews. I don't know if they're in English actually, because I speak Polish. I listen to it in Polish, but I think one of them is only in Polish, to be quite honest. But both of them talk of this, of how they took the wagons into, how they pushed the wagons and how they waited. The time they waited then for the wagons to be cleaned up. Now it's also the people were unloaded and asked to get out, I should say, or forced to get out. And then the wagons either were cleaned here or they were cleaned at Małkinia. Now there are different accounts, but you can imagine how people being crammed in to these wagons, and then what state they'd be in the summer heat, no toilets provided, and so there would be not just body fluids, but there could even be the state where people who died on these long journeys had even started to putrefy. So there are different accounts of where this actually happened. Now, there was a fence. So we've got the outer part here, and then there was an internal fence over there. Now down this area, the forest has completely overtaken it, but it wasn't like that then. There were trees within the camp, but there weren't all that many. Also, we can, not only from aerial photographs, but also we can see in Cloud Landsman Shoah what it looked like in 1978-79, and we can see from aerial photographs also the difference. We can see how the forest has reclaimed huge amounts of ground. People were forced off here, and then the entrance was somewhere around here, and there they came into an area where there were two barracks, and there was either using a megaphone, or it could even have been via this electrical sort of megaphone. Women to the left and men to the right. Now, in different stages of the camp's existence, then there were 2 barracks, and in first stage men had to undress outside. Later they were forced into the barracks, and there they undressed. But we have different accounts. If you look at Samuel Willenberg's, he was the undressing bit happened when somebody came round giving them string to tie their shoes together. He asked the person who was working at one of the Treblinka slaves where he came from. He said, "Where do you come from?" He said, "I'm from Czestochowa." And he said, "Give the 3 places, Opatów, Warsaw, Czestochowa, I think it was." And he said, "No, Czestochowa, tell them you're a builder." And that was how he was sort of selected to be a builder. Of course, as one of his former professor was in the camp, and the professor said, "Builder, there's nobody building anything here." Anyway, so they went into there, and from there the women could have their hair cut. Initially the women had their hair cut in the gas chambers itself. Then they changed it, because obviously there wasn't a huge amount of space in it, and the women had their hair cut in the barracks. And from there they were forced into what has been called Himmelstraße, the road to heaven. Now that's all in there, and I can't actually take you into it. We do have this map up here though as well. So in this area, reception area here, 2 barracks with a well, which no doubt some of them would have welcomed the sight of. And so the female barracks here and male barracks here. Then they went into this area here. Now the ones that went into the Himmelstraße, the Schlauch, as it's written there, the funnel, were initially the men. I think this was actually had more of a kink in it. The evidence appears to show. Anyway, that is through the forest there, and as it's it's quite thick undergrowth in there now, so I won't take you through the forest itself, but I can show you where the Schlaucht came out. Now, when this was initially built, there were what was called old gas chambers, and newer gas chambers were built in the early autumn of 1942 to be able to kill more people in one go. But the older gas chambers were further back, and that meant that the Schlaucht was longer. Now, when this was set up, the person who was here, Dr. Eberle from Austria, he was not very good at organizing things, and with the circumstances with Globocnik in Lublin, the organization of trains, he was really keen to get on with things, but here there was a total disaster in organization, people waiting for days to be killed, bodies not being buried, and because of this, Christian Wirth stopped the deportations, and then they tried to clean the place up a bit. What needs to be borne in mind was that in order to successfully murder people, they needed to keep the victims calm, because if the victims started showing resistance, then that would stop the whole process. Now, the Himmelstraße, as it was called, came out somewhere in this area, and the gas chambers start approximately, I mean it is somewhat difficult to say, of course, but gas chambers, the new gas chamber was roughly at about this level here, something around, sorry, just a bit further, roughly here was the sort of the corner, if you like, of the gas chamber. We can see that work has done here, and archaeological work has happened. And the older gas chambers, the first ones, would have been somewhere approximately here, just there, in this area. The gas chambers were made to look like showers, in as much as they were tiled, and because of the huge mass of people coming in, the victims were told to put their arms up. That made more room inside, and that, whereas children could even be kept back when they were putting people in, and then thrown in. Of course, they didn't want to, at this stage it didn't make any difference, because even if there was a panic, by the time people had been pushed in, then there was not much they could do about it. At the doors to, there was doors to each chamber of the gas chambers opened up, and then the bodies were taken out, and they were initially buried in this area here. As from November 42, they started to burn some of the bodies, and as from around January 43, it's not absolutely clear when, all of the bodies, including those which had been earlier buried, were dug up and burned. This means to say that, for example, at Belzec, which closed in December 1942, all of the bodies, none of the bodies were burnt immediately, so all the bodies had to be dug up and burned. And here we have an example of one of 3 pyres where the bodies were burned. And now, question, how come the people went so easily to their death? Well, part of this involves the methods taken by the Nazis to ensure that there would be no panic. That's part of it, so that they didn't themselves need many staff members here. The second thing one has to remember is that people who had been in ghettos had had 2 years, maybe even 3, of very little food, work, physical labour, which in many cases was completely pointless, but they were being brutalised during this period. There were the diseases such as typhus, which is and other starvation-related diseases. I'm not actually typhus isn't only starvation related, but many. When you put so many people into tiny areas to live together, and one of them gets ill, it's clear that they're all going to get ill. I mean and added to that, the lack of food, lack of suitable nutrition, meant that people had been seriously weakened. In this case, and this is what is really important when people say there wasn't enough resistance, that has to be borne in mind. The next thing is, when they were closing the ghettos, where could these people go? They didn't have documents. They couldn't get a food card or anything like that. If the risk of seeking assistance was enormous, because in Poland there was the penalty of death for everybody in the family if one member helped a Jew. So that's number one. The next thing is that the people who were giving the assistance didn't know if that other one was a provocateur or not. And just to give an example, I mean, I know somebody very well. I knew he's no longer alive, but he acted as a provocateur for he was pretending part of the German resistance after the end of the war, and he would go to where they knew Germans and pretend he was one in the German sea who gave him assistance. As it happened, nobody gave him assistance, but that was his work. And here they did use it, that sort of thing. In a place called Paulinów, which is not that far from here. It's about 20 kilometers, something like that. The there was, I think it was 3 Jews in hiding, but the local, the Kreishauptmann, Grams, organised 2,000 police and other units to come down from Ostrów Mazowiecka and surround Paulinów, and there they murdered, it's not clear how many people were, 11 or 12 people. And so that's how seriously they took it. But there's other accounts from this area. I was shown one nearby here. Yes, there was somebody who'd given bread to a Jewish person, and the Nazis realised where they got the bread from, and then they went and murdered the family, the bakers. This was my friend Toiva Blatt, who escaped from Sobibor. He had a situation. He went and found somebody who knew him from before the war, and he asked for bread, but that person gave him bread but told him to eat it there in front of her. So there was no evidence. So this has to be borne in mind when people came here. Now, a very interesting account is that of Rudolf Wrba. Rudolf Wrba was from Slovakia. He escaped from Auschwitz in 1944. He was taken to Auschwitz. He was taken initially to Majdanek, and he was put on he volunteered to go to Auschwitz. He didn't, because he thought he was going to some agricultural camp where there'd be good food. He went there, and he was one of those who was working on the platform, for example. Then he got himself a job. He was given a job as a scribe, and he was involved with the resistance in the camp. He escaped from the camp, and he speaks of the organization, that everything had to be perfectly organized, and if there was anything which was a kink in the system, which, for example, resistance would do, and he knew of the potential deportation of the Jews from Hungary. So there was around 1 million people who would be sent to Auschwitz to be murdered. And he said that what he wanted to do, he made a report. He escaped with somebody called Wexler, made a report to a number of people, and but his idea, although he even had the idea of not only bombing Auschwitz, but also putting parachutists down, which wasn't realistic. But all the same, he thought that anything which would put a kink in the system. But one thing he said was this, is that people escaped and they were killed like deer rather than be killed like sheep. Now, obviously, escaping into the forest, you know, I can say, for people who don't know forests, the forests seem like super friendly places and all the rest of it. I can say this, without spraying myself, I wouldn't be going into that forest, even that forest, spraying myself with insect repellent. For anybody who thinks you can sort of hang out in forests, is not somebody who knows forests very well. It's not very easy. But never mind the insects, how are you going to eat? Where are you going to get food from? These are things which often are not considered. So, had people been warned, there were warnings, there were on the BBC and things, but I think the reason why people like Abraham Bomba, who escaped from Treblinka, he's in Shoah, he was the hairdresser in Shoah, and he speaks, for example, of the time when a friend had to cut the hair of his wife and child, and before they were murdered. But he went back to Częstochowa, and people didn't want to believe him. And there's lots of people went back to the Warsaw ghetto, and they didn't want to be believed. I really need to do more on the escapees and what they said. And this one must feel that the reason why they didn't want to believe is because it was so terrible that they couldn't believe it. And by this time there was very little alternative. You know, if he'd gone back to Czestochowa, where people had been starved for so long, then what would those people, what could they have done? But in Hungary it was a different situation. These people had not been forced into ghettos and all the rest. They more or less lived more or less as they had done before the war. Yes, there had been some restrictions, but nothing like existed here in Poland. And so therefore I think there could have been a chance for their survival. I understand his point. I mean, and I also understand his point about asking for parachutists. He'd spent nearly 2 years in Auschwitz, and he, as he says himself, he didn't have the same level of courtesy and patience as those that hadn't. I think I'm quoting him there more or less exactly. But Rudolf Ruba on Shoah, there's a longer interview with him. It's 3 hours long, but he's a really good speaker, far better than I am. And and the way he recalls it is really very, very interesting. And so that's something which I strongly suggest that anyone interested in this sort of thing reads. So, okay, I'm in Treblinka. I've been here now a while in this area, and so if you're interested in research-based history, then you might want to subscribe. I upload every Tuesday and every Friday at 2000 hours my time, Central European time. So I'm based in Poland and in Germany. I largely live in my motorhome, so I travel around in that, and that's where I do this work from. I use archives for material, and I know 1 or 2 languages, so I can actually go to original sources. Not only that, as far as this period's concerned, I spent a lot of time interviewing older people and the bystanders, if you like, to try and get what they had to say. So, thanks so much for watching, and all the best from me in Treblinka, Poland.